I'm Jen. I am a mom of a nearly 5-year-old. I know because every day he wakes up and says, my birthday is the first words I hear, so it's coming. I am she, her are my pronouns, and I write, interview, host on the culture side of tech. So I don't tech, I write about tech, and it's really important to me because tech is the future. So let's not fuck it up. Oh yeah, I didn't ask if I could cuss, but they can bleep a video, right? So I'm really excited to be hosting this panel today because community is what will make or break tech, and it is what's just as much of what's good in tech as what's wrong in tech. So I really welcome everyone for joining, for pepping up, getting their beers and pepping up or whatever you want to drink. And thank you for joining us. We have some questions ahead, and also I'm known to fly off the cuff. But please, if you have any questions, jump in, comments, everything. I'll restate the questions for the recording later. But let's let our panel, well, I think we know you already, but go ahead and introduce for
Bart,
the people back home.
good to be back. I tried to get Jenky to take my place. She said no. Steve, all you.
That was too quick. Hello. I'm Steve Jager. I am currently a developer advocate for Bridge Crew. If I do the whole thing, it's painful. Bridge Crew by Prisma Cloud at Palo Alto Networks. Yeah, it's horrible. Previously, I've worked at Synopsys, Aqua Security, and StackRox. I've spent a lot of time in containers and Kubernetes and cloud native. I also run the DevSecOps London Gathering community and meetup here.
Fantastic. Go for it.
Hey folks, I am Chris. I work at Sysdig. I am Director of Technical Enablement, so I train all of our teams how to do stuff technically. I've been involved in the community for longer than I care to think about. I know kind of Nic loosely from the community long time ago, back in days of VMware and stuff. I've spent some time being a contractor on the customer side, which we'll get onto on the empathy side of things as well. But I think that's an important part of my career is being an end user of this tech as well as being a vendor selling this tech.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Nic, developer advocate with Ondat. I used to work for Chris when I had less gray hair and he had less belly. Spent probably.
I did tell you.
And spent probably most of my career between virtualization, infrastructure, data center networking, and for the past 6 years focused on cloud native, Kubernetes, and container. But probably more on the technical part, so part of engineering teams, and more recently, with Ondat, more the community side of things, which I really enjoy because it allows you, just to connect with people, share with people, whether it's at conferences or different events. And I think it's just a matter of I'll probably learn as much as they do, which is really great.
Each of you, real quick flash question on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. How important is community to your actual job? Not to the fun stuff you do on the side. Nic, you can go first.
10,
Okay.
because it's my title,
Yeah.
Probably 4.
Okay.
Really?
I can explain more on that.
He's so
but
honest. Well then I'm going to go 9.
Okay.
And I'll go 11.
Fair enough. Yeah, a lot of my work is community accidentally, I find maybe you're not looking to create, but you end up creating or joining communities. And Slack has facilitated that in these last 2 years for sure. So we've discussed your open source, your community roles. Let's talk about just clarifying what you define as empathy and how you think that fits into community. In your own experience, anyone can. Oh, yeah. You
okay.
First. Go for it, Chris.
So I think empathy. I think you need to be careful not to confuse empathy and sympathy.
Okay.
So sympathy is more kind of taking on someone else's emotions and understanding, and not just understanding, but also kind of being okay with that and embracing that. Whereas empathy is really just understanding someone's point of view. So I spend a lot of time trying to think how other people think. And sometimes that really, really confuses me. So I think about, sorry for getting political, but if I think about things like Trump supporters and stuff, I just don't understand where they're
How
coming
dare
from.
you?
I'm shocked.
Doesn't mean the answers come, but you try.
No. But I try really hard to think about, why would people think a certain way? Why would they make certain decisions? Why would they do certain things in a certain way? That flows over to my role of kind of training sales teams and technical sellers and stuff in terms of, you need to understand where someone's coming from, why they're asking certain things and why they need certain things. So I think it's really important to be able to understand that, because you need to have a two-way conversation. It's not just telling someone about stuff. You need to have a proper conversation, and then that needs to be two-way.
So 2,000 years later, you're finally accelerating past the Socratic method that we also try to figure out why, not just keep asking open-ended questions to get to the what, but the why.
Exactly,
Okay.
and it is bizarre that especially salespeople are only just getting there.
Yeah, but it's true. I was trained on the Socratic
Yeah.
method like 15 years ago, of course,
Yeah.
and sell this pencil,
Yeah.
sell that water bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that come into hiring then? How do you assess that if a salesperson actually has empathy?
It's really hard because the one thing that salespeople are really good at is selling. So they're really good at selling themselves.
Yeah.
So it's really tough, and there's various kind of techniques we use, and not techniques, but various kind of questions kind of built up over the years, and in terms of asking people about certain challenges they face and how they've handled certain situations and how they're open-minded about stuff. One thing I love about tech and love about what we do and everything we're involved in, and this industry in particular, is everything's changing all the time, and you've got to learn stuff all the time. And part of having that empathy is understanding, why are you doing that new thing? Why is that different to what we were doing earlier? Nick showing Giguere earlier. Why not OPA? What's understanding the motivations behind that is really important.
Mm-hmm. And in the cloud native space, you need to be humble, because it's the full stack developer is a really bullshit term, because no one can know everything. And you need outsiders asking, why are we building that?
Yeah.
Why are we exposing that data? Should we be building that? Who is excluded from using that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you probably touched on a very, very small part of a massive problem, which is people thinking about your customers and how customers work. It's one of the things we get into in security, is working out, okay, what could people do potentially? Yes. And then it's just silly little things like, 90% of developers in the world say, well, every person in the world has a first name and a last name, so I'm going to make them mandatory fields.
My kid has 2 surnames and no middle name.
Yeah.
How much is that fucked up in the NHS? A lot.
Yes. And there's all sorts of things like that where you need to have empathy with your users and other people around the world, not just for understanding to work with people, but understanding the users of your platform. And a lot of you mentioned this earlier, a lot of the problem when looking around the room, a lot of the challenges here is hate to call it out, but we are predominantly white male.
For those viewing, predominantly is underused here. We're talking like, I don't do math again, like tech, but 3 percentile underrepresented minoritized people here, maybe. But yeah, that happens because we also have to admit this is the same issue as the open source community. We are all here voluntarily, besides those that maybe you can say maybe free beer to be encouraged to stay. But yeah, it's hard. Like, I had to make sure my partner could be home. This is the open source community. We're not getting paid to be here. So that, of course, leads to inequity that is much more glaring in open source than the actual tech community, which is saying something. Steve, you keep nodding along, so.
I'm nodding along with Chris. Makes him feel good. I agree with Chris. It was interesting what you said about salespeople and what you mentioned about hiring salespeople, how they're very good at convincing you that they have empathy. They're all about discovering pain points in terms of customers, but actually whether they convince you or not that they're good at doing that if you're hiring them, it will wash out, because the best salespeople I've ever worked with, and dare I say it, present company included, are very empathetic and are very good at walking into customers and listening, doing more listening than talking.
Oh, for sure.
And being able to relate to what it is they're trying to, their struggles and their challenges, and be able to not necessarily sell, but just have a conversation, and it just seems to work. So I think that empathy makes for great sales.
Bart, how does empathy fit into, how do you cultivate empathy in the open source communities you work with?
I would say that because thinking about what Chris was mentioning earlier about you never know if someone's a Trump supporter or things like that. And here I am.
Yes, but there's far more Trump supporters in open source communities than women or people of color.
I haven't counted. I don't know.
If we're talking, I believe the statistics are 3 to 4% of open source community contributors are women or non-binary, and I think it's about 3% of those from Africa are contributing. GitHub's usually the source of statistics. So, of course, there may be something like GitLab or something as different statistics, but likely, if we're talking about the US, more people voted for Trump than that, for sure. So, let's be honest.
Yeah. Anyway, so the point is that looking at people that come from different backgrounds, people have different ways of thinking, and I, from the very get-go, as I didn't really say when I introduced myself, but I'm not a technical person. Like, I can proudly say that I've never written a line of code in my life. Well, I did try to learn C# 5 years ago, and it failed in about 30 minutes. And so for me, I very much felt like an outsider, but I do have to say that once I got into the CNCF and people really insisting on being welcoming and being supportive and being like, we don't care that you don't write code or that you're not an infra expert or things like that. You have other things that you can contribute. That for me was a really powerful step. And another thing that that I learned, does anybody know Hippie Hacker? Maybe somebody? Amazing person. If you don't know Hippie Hacker, look up Hippie Hacker, one of the coolest people I've met in the last few years. And he has this thing that he talks about called viral generosity. By showing kindness to others, you encourage them to do the same. And so when people arrive in our community, we very much insist on welcoming them in the same way that I was welcomed. So I think that I don't think empathy is something that is built in a day. I think it's a constant thing that has to be stated and restated, and you have to find ways to show it as well. And we can all do a better job. I mean, and you're mentioning of these percentages and things like that. I couldn't agree more. And we know it's a problem, and we know that we can do better, and we can always do better. And it's never going to be enough. That's completely obvious. And there are different ways to support different folks from different groups. So I think everyone just has to think about, how can I do a better job? Where can I help out more? And there are lots of different ways to show empathy. And also empathy is knowing that whether it's in open source or tech or not, is that you have and I think the pandemic has maybe brought this to a head, but you have no idea if someone has a relative who just passed away. You have no idea if someone just lost their job because it was a factory that got closed anyway, there's all these different things. And so when you get on a call with somebody and regardless of where they're from or that they might be a salesperson, give them a chance. Like I think, and even Trump supporters deserve a chance. So yeah, I think, and in my personal case too, is that talking about my background, I got my undergraduate degree in religious studies and I got my master's degree in Near Middle Eastern studies here in London. And a lot of what that is about is not judging someone as to like, oh, they believe this and this is wrong or this is right. Just saying they believe this and this is something that happens. What's going on there and what's driving them and how can I learn more about it to appreciate and understand it, but not to say that it's better or worse. So I think that applying that sort of worldview in interactions has been helpful. But like I said, I've been in this community world for a year and a half now and very, very grateful to be there, but I have a ton to learn. So yeah.
Well, let's talk. We know that the world's kind of clusterfuck right now, so let's always look at empathy because someone's going through some shit right now, let's be honest. Everybody's going through something. We're in a state of anxiety, aren't we, as a collective people?
And can I actually turn that over to you? Because you did an interview recently with folks from Ukraine.
That's true, yeah. I've done a couple interviews with, let's be honest, we're calling in from Europe, depending on your definition of Europe, and we all work with Ukrainians. Their third biggest export is IT outsourcing. And they are going through stress right now. Everyone I've talked to is still working. It's a good distraction. They're just doing this whole, instead of work-life balance, it's work-war balance. So they're trying to get work done because they still need to pay taxes. They still need to pay where they are. They may be likely the only breadwinner in their family, and they're supporting people probably not in their home area if they're from the eastern half of Ukraine, but have to go to another part, so they have to pay for relocation fees, hotels, whatever it is. And then they're also supporting the war effort, which is impressive, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's making Molotov cocktails. It's happening, is that how you say that, right? Mm-hmm. It's happening, and that's a wonderful thing, and that just shows community. I'm hoping that sense of empathy in the tech community for how much we're rallying around them is because we have Ukrainian colleagues, but yes, of course, it does show a greater problem that I'm sure we have colleagues from other countries that are war zones, so that we aren't supporting as much. So it's an upside and a downside, but certainly an interesting thing how the tech community's rallied around Ukraine. But in general with community, and especially with open source, I'd love to talk about more tactics. So one of the things you mentioned was when you're welcoming people and how we know how important it is. Like there's statistical probability if people have a good first experience and are able to push that first piece of code, they're more likely to come again. And again, the majority of people, unless you work for an organization, you're getting paid to do it, are volunteers. So it's about motivating the unpaid. So what are some techniques? How do your communities welcome people?
I'll go.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, we have, I contribute a lot to Bridge Crew's Checkoff, and we have a lot of issues. I probably shouldn't say, this is on camera, right?
It's open source, it's public anyway.
That's right, yeah. So the good news is that there are a lot of good first issues that you can tag that newcomers who arrive can think, okay, I can grab this one. It's not completely technical. I don't have to understand the architecture of the entire product to get in there. I can just do this little thing. And it's great, and we love it because it means that we expand our community, we get more interactions, we bring people into our Slack channel, that's another thing, where we have conversations and we can change the entire direction of the product based on community feedback. But that good first issue thing, we started doing it, and then we did a real push on it in Hacktoberfest in October, and we were blown away how many people who aren't paid fixed our product.
Which is great. And by the way, that's the best sign of a community in open source is a long backlog and a long list of bugs. It shows that people are committed enough to complain, which is the first step of commitment. And it's good. They are committed to making it better. It's a statistical probability that your product will be more successful because it has those complaints, as long as you help facilitate them to fix them. Do you also flag for people that maybe aren't newcomers to open source, just newcomer to your product? To your project, do you flag like more senior, more complex problems that maybe people that are new can be onboarded to as well? Or do you just?
I don't know that we do that. That's a good idea. See, I'm learning a lot here already. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. This is open source. This is how I learned from open source, from interviewing and talking to open source communities, because everyone's very different in a lot of ways. What about you? Do you have any?
Yeah, so for me, I think, so the first thing when it comes to contributing to open source, the onboarding process, like finding easily the information and basically putting yourself in the shoes of the first-time contributor, whether they are, and you don't know who they are, they can be experienced, not experienced, can be a student. So having a good first guidelines, like to help people, what are the rules, like fixing stating the basis, and then just help people get on board. So maybe I would rather do like overcommitment in terms of being more detailed. How do you want to contribute? What are the good way of doing things? How to tackle the first? What is the good kind of first issues? And maybe assign some people like often contributors, like as mentors, these kind of things. And of course it goes through Slack as well. But it's just like putting yourself in the shoes of the people why they want to contribute to your project. So there is this, and also there's things around incentives like top contributors, goodies, and stuff like things people like in general.
Who are in that group of top contributors? How do you measure a top contributor?
I mean, a number of commits probably, right?
So technical contributions only.
On a Git repo, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about Git. Now, in terms of the project itself, there's different way to contribute, and actually DoK is a very good example because we need people for pretty much everything, like organizing stuff, of course coding, and
Docs, documentation. for sure.
documentation,
Always lacking.
art,
Translation. of docs.
yeah, all these kind of things is really important. So, yeah, it's also help just broadening the scope so that different people can come with different reasons.
How do you incentivize the non-technical people, though? How do you track that or find ways to incentivize them? Because that's a challenge.
Oh, I don't know. I'm technical.
You are incentivized automatically.
But yeah, I would imagine it's more around incentives for, I don't know, maybe it can be AWS voucher or stuff like books if they are students or
A
all this
non-technical
kind of.
person wouldn't need an AWS voucher.
Oh, sorry. I mean,
They could sell it
I mean
online.
Amazon voucher.
Oh, Amazon.
Yeah, for me,
okay.
AWS, Amazon, I'm technical. It's the same thing.
They
I
want
buy-
us to separate it, but yeah, we should keep it together
In real life,
for
it's
an ethical
separated.
conversation.
This is what I mean, like Amazon stuff or books, or depending on where they come from, you can do different things. Right? So,
That's very true. Not everyone has easy access to Amazon
Yeah.
and Prime and everything with it, so that's a really valid point. What about everybody else? How do you get new people invigorated and excited in your community?
So I think the sales thing, there's a barrier. This isn't necessarily to do with my community, but my specific community, but some of the communities I'm involved in, there is still a technical bar. Because even if you want to contribute to docs or do a translation or something, you still need to know how to use GitHub.
Is that a problem? Should we? Is
Well,
that where
no, we
should be
shouldn't.
housing it?
It's. I mean, I hate Git. It's a real pain in the ass. It's really. I don't do it enough. Every time I need to use it, I have to go to have a docs page, working out how do I contribute to a docs page. It's you have this technical bar already across that, so it's actually very difficult to be a non-technical contributor, and I think that's a challenge we need to solve.
yeah, I think with us it's easy because everyone is. I mean, Git is just everyone is using it, so even like.
But then
you're
you-
using it too, like.
but then you take that-
You're using it a lot, and it's just look me too much technical, So
I
it's.
got feedback on that. I think, I guess, coming from a technical perspective, but GitHub has made and GitLab has made things easier to use because Git itself is hard.
Yeah.
And, yes, so my counter argument is Git has actually made things better.
They relatively, yes, I agree with you.
Just for those watching back home, one of our esteemed audience members was saying that GitHub and GitLab, while not being perfect or making Git perfect, it has made it a lot easier for people to contribute. So it's a step in the right direction, just not there yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
It's one of the problems with empathy is thinking you're being empathetic sometimes when actually you aren't, because you live in, like I live in the Git bubble and I don't find it hard. And now you're actually raising a very good point that how do we get non-technical contributors? I mean, our documentation is all in Git, and if you look at it, you wouldn't know. But there is a, don't like this page, click here. And you think, oh good, I can change. I'm a non-technical person who uses this, and then I'm just thrust right into Git world. And I may not know how to use that, but we kind of just assume that everybody does.
Because that's where it's
Here's
easiest for us.
Here's an even worse extension of that.
Okay.
And it's not, fortunately, with any of your companies, so we can talk about
All right.
it. So let's imagine you submit a pull request into Git for some documentation, and let's even assume that the pull request content was acceptable. The pull request sign-off signature was not acceptable, and then it got blocked, and we've lost the will to live here, right? and that's really, I guess, an extension of what you're saying about empathy, which is there are standards, and standards need to be met because standards help enforce delivering things and keeping quality and things like this. But helping those, when those requests come in, if you see that request as valuable, which in this particular instance it's acknowledged it's valuable, but you didn't quite get the grammar right. So please to run away and sort yourself out. That, to me, again, someone that can use Git and can Git bisect and can do relatively complicated things in there, is like, this is where the community isn't quite working in this case.
And
And
is
honestly, that was-
anyone flagging that?
Can you just
Yeah, just I want to summarize. Yeah, exactly. There's maybe someone can figure out how to onboard on GitHub, GitLab, and they can this is me a-technical trying to explain this back, so we'll see if this works. And they even do a good job or a good contribution to code or a use case or something, and
Even
then
bearable.
or bearable at least. And there's something wrong with it. Maybe it's not the right example or the right language, which can be an inclusion issue as well. You used master in the you're still using master in your code, side note. But maybe there's different things that can't come up, but then people are just rejected automatically. And is there a process to then address that and say, thank you for your contribution. Can we work on this together? Can I upboard? Or are you just losing that contribution?
Yeah, the idiosyncrasies of acceptance aren't always clear when you're submitting a pull request on Git.
Yep.
And if you are rejected, as you say, it's down to how that company or product or open source community, their own empathy towards new contributors as to whether they're going to. Actually, I have a good example, if you don't mind. I contributed recently to a project called Fig.io. It's like a command line extension, makes your command line life easier. Anyway, I wanted to add something to it. And what I committed on that PR, I hadn't read their contribution guide at all. I did exactly the user thing, right? I just went, me, submit. And their response to that was 10 different comments on what I've done, but they basically gave me the answers. Like, it was very prescriptive. Like,
And this was automated? Like
no,
through
this
a
was an
linter,
actual
or it
person.
was an actual human being?
Had responded.
Human in the loop.
A
God.
human had given me all the instructions. This is a great try. Here's the doc link. Here's what you should have done. Here's the actual code so you don't have to go to the doc link. Do this and resubmit and you've got it. And then I still screwed it up again, but then I got it right. But
I think that's the key thing you said there is prescriptive.
Yeah,
Scripted.
it was really, really good. I was really impressed with that community.
So it gives you like the also the you just want to contribute more when you see something like this.
And I have.
Give you the incentive. That's
Yeah.
one of them, like being kind with people.
Yeah. On the flip side, I've had absolutely that experience contributing to an open source community, just docs, because I thought, you know what, I'm not a techie, I do not know how to write Go. I'm just going to do a contribution to docs, and the whole feedback back was, oh no, you need to do this and that, and resubmit it into this section, not that section. But it wasn't prescriptive. It was just, oh, of course you know how to do all this stuff. And I've never tried to contribute to that project again, just because it was tough. And I had one of the contributors come back to me and say, oh, great contribution, really, really good work. This is your first one, that's amazing. But it never got submitted, it never got merged because all the different problems they highlighted and stuff.
It
and
fell
it was,
on the floor
Yep.
and nothing good came out of it and
Yep.
you feel bad. And
Yeah.
You're bored of it, of course. Yeah, please.
So, on that note though, I sometimes feel like, you know, I do a lot of work with the CNCF. We have huge communities, lots of contributors, but most of them are volunteers. And I sometimes feel that we miss the point about empathy needing to be both ways. The maintainers and the moderators and the people processing your PRs are also volunteers, and they're doing this at 11 p.m. at night, you know, on their spare time. And I can't tell you how many PRs have come my way, and it's like, you've not read anything. You're expecting me to spend 2 hours replying to this PR that you've spent 5 minutes putting together, and I'm supposed to be empathetic? So there's a counter argument to it.
I think that's a common frustration because a lot of maintainers, maybe not all in the room here, but a lot of maintainers and main contributors may be freelance or volunteers as well, so they have limited time, and if you're getting crap, you don't really feel like dealing with it and responding to that, so you don't have a lot of time and maybe you're rewriting that code because it's easier than responding to people. So I totally get that, but I would go back to you and ask, as a maintainer, I don't know if you are, but as a maintainer, why wouldn't you look to elevate more people to leadership positions to help you in that response and give up the keys to the code?
And I think that's the key, right? So all the big successful projects have been really successful at building up a sustainable set of maintainers and a sustainable community that can actually help with the workload.
That was the example of Weaveworks tonight, that they can't be the only owner of the project if it's going to be successful in CNCF, which is while CNCF is by no means perfect, that is a very interesting fact that they require for something to get out of the sandbox. You need a community not just corporate sponsorship. So I want to ask a poll of everyone. Please only raise your hand if you definitely know for sure. If you're not sure, does your community have a code of conduct? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. That is known as the most important way to get. I like that people weren't sure, so they're like, do we? It's proven as the most important way to get inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion and retention of volunteers in your community, because it is setting the baseline for a safe space. So what are some tips? What should be included in a code of conduct, or anyone, of course?
I think number one is diversity in people writing the code of conduct.
Yes. So outsource it to the what's the code covenant, which is very good, which isn't a bad thing to start with for sure.
But the other side of it, sorry to interrupt again, but the other side of it is not just about the projects, it's also about the community itself. I think a lot of the meetups, I'm actually not sure about this meetup, but a lot of the meetups now have code of conduct and ways of behaviour and stuff, and the certain expectations they have. So they can literally call people out. I don't know how often it happens, but everyone has to agree to the code of conduct before, turning up to. We did it for Kubernetes Community Days last year, as when you sign up for the event, it's a free event, but you have to agree to the code of conduct.
That doesn't mean it's always enforced, because
Absolutely,
KubeCon,
100%.
we've had one enforcement.
Yep.
At the last in-person event, someone was tweeting out white supremacy stuff, and they made a glorious example of him. But I knew 4 women personally who got groped at the parties at KubeCon. Nothing happened to help avoid that. So yes, they did a glorious example, and yes, we hate white supremacists, but that was an easy win for them PR. So how do y'all enforce your codes of conduct? Have you had a situation where lack of empathy or just horrible harassment has happened, and how do you enforce it or deal with it? You don't have to name names, or you can name names, because I'm all up for that too.
One of the easiest ones in my case, which it doesn't meet some of the references you were mentioning, but it's happened multiple times where people have come into the community, where community members have contacted me saying, hey, I've been contacted by these 3 different people who are directly trying to do sales pitches inside the community, and it's happened multiple times. And they won't post in open channels, but they'll literally just go from member to member. And so then I have to approach them. I have to explain that they're not allowed to do that. And then I put a message saying it's come to my attention that this has been going on, and just reiterate where our code of conduct is, which is quite similar to the CNCFs as well. And yeah, so that would, fortunately in my case, that's the, I would say, the 2 examples that come to mind the most. But then other things as well, and also, one of the things about empathy too is, you're interacting with people from tons of different countries with lots of different backgrounds, many of which I am not familiar with. And so then you have to, I don't like using the word tone police, but you have to get into guiding folks in terms of different kinds of interactions they're going to be having with people, and things that simply aren't okay. But I think that when you do the groundwork of having that code of conduct, and also knowing that it can't be a static document, that you have to go back and revisit it, and exactly what Chris said as well too, is that if it's not being designed and drafted by people from different backgrounds, you're not going to be perceiving the things that other people can be going through. So get them in and make them champions. And then those people, the buy-in in your community and their feeling of acceptance and interest and participation, they're going to be much more active community members. So I think there's a lot to be gained from really to working on that and reworking it.
And you can even reinforce behavior through Slack. Like CNCF is one of the good examples, I think, that has these automatic replies. If you use, hey guys, hi, there are non-guys in this community, things like that, just an automatic reply. People usually then maybe delete and repost their comment, or they'll apologize, whatever, but it's a good way to automatically reinforce. Have you had any other reinforcement issues? That was a great example, thank you, Bart. Or maybe times you kind of wish you had and you didn't know how to deal with it, or also anybody in the community here?
I've not had first-hand any of the stuff, which is part of my privilege, but you hear stories of stuff, and I've certainly been in rooms where new people, sorry, I'm not going to talk salesperson, but new people, younger people kind of to the organisation, go to the marketing team. It'd be great if we had booth babes. And just everyone in the room just dies a little bit. And it's
Mobile World Congress just got rid of them in 2019.
I know, it's depressing. But then still, we go from that, and I think last year before COVID, there was an event, and someone was like, you know what, a great idea is going to do underpants giveaway.
Shirts are usually not inclusive because they're usually the unisex shirts are men's.
Yep.
Socks are great.
Yep. Yep.
But like alcohol is another example. You need to have non-alcoholic drinks, and even you technically should have non-alcoholic events sometimes too, especially as we come on. Ramadan starts next week. Maybe have non-food events, or wait until they're later in the day, things like that. Or if you're doing an online event, maybe ask people to not eat during fasting times. Normally I'm like, you can eat, you're on your lunch break, but maybe turn off your camera then. Things like that. There are different things that is really valid. Yeah. But
Is it possible that socks are the unifier?
Socks? Is it possible socks are the unifier? I'm a huge fan of socks as a giveaway. Also, these backpacks are an excellent giveaway. Good job. A higher cost one, though, I recognize. But or be more environmentally friendly and not give away anything. Donate to Ukrainian developers' causes or something. But yeah.
I think it was Grafana-Con a couple of years ago, and they had a carbon neutral event. So all the giveaways were biodegradable leaflets with a seed in it. And it was awesome. I just loved it, and they went all to all the sponsors and said, "We are a carbon neutral event." That doesn't mean you can't give stuff away, but you need to do the carbon offset of anything you give away.
And spoken as an American in Europe, don't fly Americans, so no offense, to Europe all the time to your conferences. It's bad for the environment and it's bad for local community building. But I live here, so it's different. Yeah, see. So just as a final thought as we wind down, is there anything you're going to take away from this to bring to your communities? I told you I was going to make the questions up and throw them at you as we went.
I've heard a few things I think that we could do better already. I mean, you already mentioned a few about how we do slightly better, more advanced issues for people who are coming into our technical community.
Because you want those people to participate
Because we
more,
really want those people there, and I've experienced that as well, because I'm not non-technical. I'm technical. And I do find when I approach a project that has some level of maturity, getting into that is very difficult still. So that'd be great. So I should learn from my own experience, which I don't, obviously. And then the idea of automating some of the checks on code of conduct. I have seen that, not that I've been caught out on it, but sometimes you write a post, the language or grammar you choose, you don't think about it in a way of, as you sort of check my privilege, right? I write things wrong.
Or the opposite.
And you guys, it's in Disney Pixar movies, it's everywhere. So it took me 2 years as a non-guy to break it into the much more comfortable y'all for me.
Yeah.
It sounds really weird as a British person saying y'all.
Well,
I printed out the word folks and put it behind my monitor, behind my camera. So it's literally always in my face.
There you go.
And it's just about
the lessons keep coming.
Just about taking me now so I can I catch myself sometimes, and again, I die a little bit inside.
In writing, it's easier to break, but in spoken, it's really hard. Because it is everywhere. I'm telling my near 5-year-old all the time, I'm not a guy, honey.
So I've already got good takeaways from here, and you mentioned code of conduct in terms of open source. It's interesting when you create a new GitHub account or get a project, it gives you a code of conduct.
Okay.
That isn't terrible.
I'm gonna be the judge of that. I'm really excited to be the judge of that.
Check my
I've
privilege.
never seen that.
Before I came here, because you mentioned it yes, I read the questions in advance, and I checked to see what it now says. I'd be curious to see what it had changed over time.
Well, it's changed. That was the major thing. That's why I had to call you out on master. There are examples of how after June 2020 and the racial reckoning in the U.S., they've finally changed master, slave. Of course.
It's still a default, right? I'm not changing it because it's extra work. If they make main the default, I don't have any issue. It's master.
We're
For
going
me,
to
it's just
check
a
your
word.
privilege that you have the choice to
When
look
you
at it as
create
extra work, but
a GitHub repo, the default branch is always master. They didn't change it.
Still, they haven't changed that.
It's main.
It's main now.
It's main
yeah.
now.
I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't create a master branch.
No, but if you nowadays you create a new repo.
Yeah,
stuff,
maybe now, yeah. Main,
Yeah.
like it's recent or... Because
But
the one
I'm
I have
sure
is
you
created
may
a couple
have
of days ago. It was a
community
master.
member that would be happy to update that. But you have to ask. But yeah, it's it's changing all the time. Scrum Master somehow is still allowed, which goes against the whole. If you're looking as the master of the Scrum, also goes against the whole idea of the role as well. But it's silly. But we all need to.
I was going to say they've grandfathered in master, but saying grandfathered is probably also wrong.
That actually comes from slavery.
Ah,
Grandfather
See?
loading
there you go.
actually comes from slavery in the U.S. Also, we're using an excess of American terms, aren't we?
Yep.
Oh,
I'm not advocating for British,
Why is
but I'm
that?
advocating for like other languages. Anything else anyone's taking away from this? Or
I like the I like the celebration, the non-technical contributions. I think it's a lot much harder to track because you can't just look in number of pull requests and commits and
I bet
stuff.
you could
but
use Slack to help track that.
no,
How
absolutely.
many? Because you
Absolutely.
can track how active people are. Even you're not reading their DMs, but you can see how active they are.
But
in
there's
DMs.
you got me thinking about some of the real kind of non-interactive stuff. The amount of people that are just talking about what you do, that are on Twitter, that aren't directly interacting with you, but they're still part of your community. They're out there shouting about it and talking about it. It reminds me back to being involved in the community and asking someone in the project, what's the latest slide deck, because I want to give a presentation. They were like, well, we don't like people giving presentations that don't use the product. And it just made me feel really alienated because I love talking, as you can tell.
We're all guilty here. That's how we end up on stage. That's really good. And of course, the bonus effect is that if you are giving prizes to people that tweet, more tweets will come.
Yep.
You had a takeaway as well.
I think there's a lot to be learned from some of the larger communities, right? Because what we've seen with communities like Kubernetes, where you have like 60,000 contributors, is it's evolved a more mature paradigm. So we have things like, the contributor strategy groups, for example, that actually feed and water and define what good looks like. And they do things like, putting awards for, as they put it, chopping wood and carrying water kind of thing, which are non-technical contributions. But there is one key takeaway, which is there are always going to be bad actors, and some people are just, obviously bad behavior. There are also a lot of people that just don't know better. And I think one of the key things that works in those larger communities is using educational material. So like the Kubernetes contributor strategy groups have actually put together simple educational programs on why the code of conduct is important, what good diversity looks like in a community, and those sort of things. And we're actually, for some of the graduation criteria, we're actually looking to make sure that maintainers have actually attended some of those, half-hour courses to make sure that they actually know the stuff. Because the sad thing is that for a lot of people, it's just not known. And they would behave better if they're just given some guidance.
To summarize real quick, our colleague in the audience said we should look to like CNCF, like massive communities like Kubernetes who have done a lot of stuff, have larger than maybe 60,000 contributors, and then they've created these different, they have committees just for contributor outreach. They also have a lot of money. So that helps. Of course, these are jobs. So yes, it helps that your open source project has money, but there are smaller projects doing good work too. But I think it is a very good point that we should look to see how we can maybe adapt. It would be actually, I'm writing a pitch in my head already. It would be a really interesting article to see how you could adapt some of these things to a poor broke ass normal open source company. Okay. Thank y'all so much. And thank you, everyone. And thank you for those that are, I hope we'll have open comments on the YouTube, because another thing of inclusion is not everyone can come out of the woodworks yet. Just because Boris says COVID's over at 300,000 cases, it's not. So we appreciate you joining the community and communicating online as well, even though you may not be comfortable or ready or able to go outside. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.